There it is, protesters in Iran shouting death to America as the president vows to install new security measures to keep America safe. Welcome, everyone. I'm Maria Bartiromo, and today for Neil Cavuto, this is your world. Iran, where those protests are taking place right now, is one of the 7 countries covered by the president's order calling for extreme vetting, an order that is now being held up in court. Florida Attorney General Pam Bondi on that in a moment. First, though, we go right to Kristen Fisher. She's at Mar-a-Lago in Florida, where the president is headed with Japan's prime minister on what happens now. Kristen.
Well, Maria, not only did President Trump say today that he has no doubt that he will win in court, he also hinted that something else on national security, perhaps another executive order, will be coming as early as next week. The president says he's simply doing what he believes is necessary to keep the country safe. To that end, listen to what he told my colleague Blake Berman a little earlier today.
Do you still feel as confident now as you have been at any point that you and the administration will be able to protect the homeland?
I feel totally confident that we will have tremendous security for the people of the United States. We will be extreme vetting. We'll be going forward. We'll be doing things to continue to make our country safe. It will happen rapidly, and we will not allow people into our country who are looking to do harm to our people.
Now, attorneys for the Justice Department argued that the courts should have little to no role in reviewing matters of national security, but the Ninth Circuit Court rejected that argument, saying, quote, "It is beyond question that the federal judiciary retains the authority to adjudicate constitutional challenges to executive actions." Now, this issue was the very first thing that the president was asked about during that joint press conference today with the Prime Minister of Japan. The two are now headed here to Mar-a-Lago aboard Air Force One, where tonight they'll have dinner, and tomorrow they're expected to play golf, all while attorneys back in Washington plot their next move. Maria.
All right, Kristen, thank you. And as we told you, protests erupting in Iran over what they are calling President Trump's Muslim ban. It is a term Democrats are also using to describe the president's extreme vetting order. Asra Nomani is a Muslim American. She says this is not a Muslim ban. Good to see you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks so much, Maria.
You also feel that this is really detrimental to the country coming together and getting things done.
Absolutely. You know, what we faced after the election, I believe, is something that I'm calling a hashtag intifada. You know, Maria, as you know, intifada is a term used in our Muslim world to talk about a rebellion, a resistance. And, you know, it's being presented as hashtag resist, hashtag, you know, Donald Trump is Hitler. There's just so much rhetoric that's going on right now that is being presented now and exploited by Muslim extremists around the world to paint America as against Muslims. And what I fear is that the left is in fact cooperating with this narrative that America is hostile to Muslims. I am Muslim. I feel more safe in this country than I do in any other Muslim country in the world.
In fact, in your op-ed that I'm looking at, you say this is the alt-left cyber jihad against Trump and his supporters. You know, it's almost as if, Asra, the people are forgetting what just happened. I mean, the people voted for Donald Trump, and, you know, extreme vetting is actually one of his more popular executive orders in the country.
Yeah, Maria, you know, the left is right now triumphant about the idea that it has won in court, but I do believe deeply in my heart, as a lifelong liberal, that the left is losing in the court of public opinion. The Democratic Party is in a shambles. I was proud to be a liberal because I thought bleeding heart liberals was a good thing. I thought it was a fine compliment to be compassionate about society. But now what I've experienced myself personally and seen in the streets of America is that, in fact, the left is more than happy to just rip the heart out of people and stomp on it in order to, you know, further its own interests. And I do believe that the Democratic Party is failing us as a country also in that it did lose an election, and it needs to stop with this, humiliation that it's constantly trying to do of the Trump administration, and allow this party that has won to govern in a way that will serve our country. And that would be my hope as a citizen. And I know there's a lot of other people that are fed up, and when 2018 comes around, they're going to cast their ballots against this type of civil disobedience and civil disturbance that has unfortunately ripped the heart out of America.
Yeah, I mean, you almost wonder if people will remember in 2018, even just the confirmation process, right? I mean, all of these nominees and all of the stalling going on. Unfortunately, a lot of those senators who are doing the stalling are from states that voted for Donald Trump.
Exactly. And so, what I've done for myself, as Maria, you are more skilled at this than I am, but you know very clearly that we always need to follow the money. And so what I've done for myself is I've built a database, literally on Google, using an Excel spreadsheet. And what I've done is I've put down the list of all of the organizations that were involved with the Women's March. All of these organizations that are putting forward hashtag no ban, no wall, hashtag resist. And I'm following the money. And what I see is that they are very well funded by the same political donors that wanted Hillary Clinton in power. And they think that we're fools, but we're not. Most of America has a spirit in which it wants America to succeed, not just one political party.
Asra, before you go, let me ask you, there's a conversation going on right now in Washington on whether the Trump administration should call the Muslim Brotherhood a terrorist organization. What do you think?
Thank you so much for raising this important question. The Muslim Brotherhood was born in the 1920s out of the demise of the Ottoman Empire, which was the Muslim world's last caliphate. And what we have seen is over all these decades, that was the great humiliation that Osama bin Laden wanted to correct, the demise of the Ottoman Empire. The Muslim Brotherhood is an organization that would like to see political Islam expressed throughout the world. And we have to identify it. And I appreciate, as a Muslim, that the Trump administration is clear-eyed and very coherent in its identification of the Muslim Brotherhood as somebody who is not interested in the well-being of America or Americans.
So you're saying, yes, the Trump administration should name them a terrorist organization?
So, Maria, the question about terrorist organization is a really difficult one, but they are definitely not friendly to the United States as a secular government, and that is something that we have to be clear about. And they have established beachheads in America and have proxy organizations. And so I really appreciate, as somebody who is a Muslim reformer, who challenges the Muslim Brotherhood, I appreciate that we finally have an administration that's not giving them front door access to the White House.
Asra, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you for just being so smart about all of this.
Asra Nomani joining us there. Meanwhile, a new report finds 1,100 refugees have entered the United States since February 3rd, when Judge James Robart put a stay on the president's order for extreme vetting. 77% coming from the 7 countries named in that order, nearly a third from Syria alone. Reaction now from Florida Attorney General Pam Bondi. Good to see you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, Maria. Good to see you, too.
Your reaction?
Well, this is a law enforcement issue, and what scares me as Chief Law Enforcement Officer, Legal Officer for Florida, along with the rest of our country, is look at the numbers before the temporary ban was in place. Less than 10% from these countries, these 7 countries in question, came into our great country. Now, 77%, over 1,100 people, the reports are telling us. What's so frightening is that's a 5-day, if you take away the day of travel, that's about in 5 days, 1,100 people came into our great country of over 322 million people. So these 1,100 people are just going to disappear into a sea of 322 million people in our country without proper vetting. Now, if these 1,100 people are interpreters, are people who have helped our country, you and I and all of the country will agree, let's bring them in. Let's get them out of there. They have to be vetted. But if these were extreme cases, Maria, why weren't they in 2 weeks before this this ban,
Yeah.
if it was so of such great importance to get them in our country, this is about America's safety and protecting our great men and women in law enforcement who now have, all these folks on the street without being properly vetted.
Yeah, I'm looking at a quote right now from Syrian President Bashar Assad, and he says, quote, "There are definitely terrorists among the millions of refugees that have fled this war-torn country." In an interview that is published today, you can find it on the net, Assad told Yahoo News. The terrorists in Syria holding the machine gun are killing people. They are going to appear as peaceful refugees. This underlines exactly what you just said. Of course, America wants to be home to people who need the independence and safety, but there's no secret that ISIS has already said they have a passport-making machine, and they will infiltrate the refugee flow.
That's right, and that gave me chills when you read that. I had not heard that, what he said, and it's so very true. And you know what? It doesn't take 1,100 people. You and I know it takes one person to get into our country, and that's what President Trump's saying, America's safety first.
All right, so
we're not trying to keep them out forever. People just have to be properly vetted to protect the 322 million people in our great country and all of North America.
It's hard to understand how the vetting happens when you don't have papers. You don't have
5 days.
Anything from these people, particularly coming from Syria, right? I mean, how do you actually execute extreme vetting? What would you like to see?
Well, that's the question. And think about the numbers again, 2 weeks prior, less than 10% were from those countries. So now how all of a sudden within 5 days, given the travel time, within 5 days, would any person be able to clear 1,100 people from those 7 countries to say they are clear to come into our country? Again, if they're interpreters, if they have health issues, then we're all for bringing them in. But if their lives were in jeopardy, why weren't they brought in 2 weeks before?
Yeah.
But again, it's protecting our country. Just slow it down. That's all we need to do.
Well, so what is your reaction to the courts and the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals basically saying no about this ban? What's your take on what has taken place right now? Do you think the Trump administration should take this all the way to the Supreme Court?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I believe they have to. And, USC 1182 speaks, it's crystal clear that the president has the authority to do this. And it's America's safety first. So, this is going to continue through the court system. Ultimately, I think we all believe it will end up in the United States Supreme Court, and we'll have some finality, and America will be protected, as well as letting our good immigrants into this country.
All right, we will leave it there. Pam Bondi, good to see you. Thanks very much.
But does that mean corporate tax reform, individual rate changes are done together?
That's my strong preference because there's growth in both, and there's growth in both in a major way. In the simplification, just the redesign of how we tax so we can leapfrog back to that lead pack in the world, best place on the planet for new jobs and investment. So the president's going to make his announcement. I'm hopeful we move those together, but we're having a lot of discussions on timing and sequence.
All right, but it is fair to say that corporate and the individual rates are done concurrently.
I sure hope so. Okay. I think that is the best way to go.
Well, you heard it here first. The top Republican on tax reform telling Neil he wants to see individual and corporate tax cuts at the same time. And the White House is in line with that. President Trump just promising a big announcement is coming soon. Steve Forbes says it can't come soon enough. Steve, good to see you, rather.
Good to see you.
So that was encouraging from Kevin Brady in terms of what he's looking for. But this border adjustment tax is the issue for both sides, right? The Republicans want to raise revenue while also cutting taxes.
Yeah, I think they're going to have to really examine that border tax. It's a sales tax on working families. They should drop it and go for a pure tax cut. If they do that and combine, as Chairman Brady said, personal and corporate at the same time, you'll see the Dow Jones add another 500 or 1,000 points. But introducing a complicated new tax that hurts working families, that's a non-starter and just drags this thing out and jeopardizes a good reform this year.
Why do you think the border adjustment tax impacts families, and that families will have to pay more? Connect the dots for us in terms of the negative aspects of a border adjustment tax. Because the truth is, Steve, most countries have some kind of a tax at the border, right? Whether it's a VAT tax or a border adjustment tax.
Well, when you put in effect, the border tax is a 20% sales tax on stuff we bring in. So you go to Walmart, you go to Target, your prices are going to go up. Your gasoline in many parts of the country for millions of motors is going to go up 30 cents a gallon. This is going to take out of the pockets of American consumers well over $120 billion a year. And these are the people who elected Donald Trump, and now the first thing they're going to see is prices of what they buy. And these people are not rich; don't have a lot of margin for any kind of setback in prices. You're going to be raising prices on them. And as for other countries, just because they do bad things to their consumers, I was going to use a stronger word, doesn't mean we should follow their bad example. Those countries with VATs, value-added taxes, or these sales taxes, those countries grow slower than the United States. So why should we imitate failure?
Yeah. So what you're saying is once there's a border adjustment tax and companies have to swallow that, they will then respond by raising prices. So even though
absolutely,
even though individuals are seeing lower taxes on income, they will be faced with higher prices on products. And
they'll probably see the higher prices faster than they do the tax cuts, unless they do what I hope they do and make those tax cuts retroactive to Jan 1.
Yeah, well, that's another issue. Are we going to, because when Kevin Brady talks about it, he says, well, it depends on when we get it done. If we're getting this done close to the end of the year, this could be a 2018 issue. You're saying even if this tax plan is executed in November of 2017, it should be retroactive to January 1.
You want the American people to see right away, as soon as possible, positive things from this new administration. So if they make it retroactive, people will see it in the next paycheck. They'll see it in a huge refund in April of 2018. That'll help the economy, both in consumer spending and investment. If you don't get a good economy in 2018, the Republicans could lose the House and have real trouble with the Senate.
Well, certainly we're seeing an impact on the markets. You know, analysts are saying that a 15 or 20% corporate tax rate is equivalent to a 20% increase in earnings. That's what's driving these markets right now, up 100 points. Two other headlines today, Steve. Real quick reaction to the fact that Dan Tarullo is stepping down as the bank regulator at the Federal Reserve. I know everybody was expecting that, but still, he was really the hawk who made things very uncomfortable for the major banks. And then we are likely to get the confirmation of Steven Mnuchin on Monday night. Your thoughts?
Well, having Tarullo go out is a good thing. He was an anti-bank kind of person, anti-finance kind of person. That'll open up another seat for President Trump. He'll now have 3 seats on the Fed, start to make real positive change in monetary policy.
All right.
And getting Mnuchin in, good to get that cabinet complete as fast as possible.
All right, we'll leave it there. Steve, good to see you as always.
Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome back. Police on the Capitol investigating a potentially serious breach in our security. A computer hack attack against members of the House Intelligence and Foreign Affairs Committees, reportedly by 3 brothers who work there. They were hired to manage information technology in their offices. Retired Army Lieutenant Colonel Bob McGinnis joins us now. And Colonel, it is good to see you. Thanks very much for joining us.
Well, thank you, Maria.
What do you make of this story? These are 3 brothers. They're being investigated for accessing lawmakers' computer networks without their knowledge, as well as stealing equipment from Congress. But the point that I find just stunning is the fact that they weren't arrested yet, because there is some speculation that there is more coming, that perhaps there is even a tie to terrorism. How can this happen?
Yeah, if there's espionage or terrorism suspected, they should have been arrested. The fact that they were brought to the attention of the authorities and it's in the newspapers, that's disturbing. You know, folks like this should have a clearance, first of all. They're working for foreign affairs and for intel committees. They should have a relatively high classification. You know, what is really suspicious here to me, Maria, is that what they're being paid. A 22-year-old getting $160,000 here in Washington. Now, I've hired a whole bunch of 20-something-year-olds with multiple degrees. We don't pay anywhere close to that, and yet, all three of these brothers are making or six figures. So that's suspicious. Now, also, they work for a host of congresspersons, and in fact, it would appear as if those people aren't being supervised, which gives them access to very sensitive information. It talks about networks. The networks that I have access to at the Pentagon, we have special cards, special numbers, and special spaces.
Yeah.
So you have to violate all three of those in order to get what apparently these men are alleged to have done.
Well,
that is very serious.
It's absolutely extraordinary. And let me just point out their names. The brothers are Abid, Imran, and Jamal Awan. They 20, 21, 22. They were all making either $160,000 or $165,000. That's 3 times what the average IT staffer makes in a congressional committee. And they were reviewing, and they had access to data from foreign affairs, including Benghazi. Lots of foreign affairs between the U.S. and its friends across the world or enemies, as well as intelligence data. How does this happen?
Well, obviously the vetting process on Capitol Hill for IT people is broken. And that should send alarm bells across this entire city. DIA, CIA ought to be very upset because their people trot up to Capitol Hill. They deliver testimony and very sensitive information that jeopardizes this country if it's compromised. And it would appear that if these three can easily hack into members' very sensitive information networks, then we have a very serious problem. So I would call on the leadership there on Capitol Hill to immediately investigate this. And it's not just these three likely. There must be a systemic issue if 3 young people can get those salaries, not have the type of supervision, get access to members' very sensitive files. We have a serious issue.
Yeah, well, the investigation is ongoing, so of course we will be watching. Good to have you on the program, sir. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Maria.
We're not usually in the limelight like this, and we're not really used to it, but we're proud to have been able to play this role.
That was Washington Attorney General Bob Ferguson laughing in the background as his colleague takes a bow for last night's ruling against President Trump's extreme vetting. Attorney Ben Stein not amused. Ben, good afternoon to you.
Well, no laughing matter at all. I've been a young attorney for the federal government, and I know that we have notions of grandiosity sometimes. But look, what the court in Washington has done is approximately the equivalent of the Japanese suing Franklin Delano Roosevelt and claiming that they should have due process rights not to have the U.S. go to war against them. And even though they're not U.S. citizens or residents, the court grants them standing and says, well, they might be harmed and therefore the U.S. can't go to war against them. What the court has done here is a body blow to the U.S. Constitution, and I don't think these young kids should be giggling about it, and it frankly shocks me that they are.
Well, look, there is an ideology here, obviously, and they're taking a victory bow. Do you think this undermines President Trump's term?
I think it shows that the effete core of impudent snobs, as we used to call them long ago, is at war. I think a civil war has already begun in this country with the disruption of Republican town halls and Republican gatherings, with the smearing of Republicans in almost every corner of the media, obviously not in this corner of the media. I think that the fact that the courts lend themselves to this obstruction of executive power is outrageous. Look, the power to regulate immigration is expressly given to the president. It's not, he doesn't have to make a showing. He doesn't have to explain himself. It's expressly given to him. There's never been a court that has ever blocked the president's use of immigration power ever before this week. It's an outrage that they're doing it now.
A number of people this morning told me that they think, including Alan Dershowitz, for example, that they think that the president should redo the order, do a new order, make it narrower. He's obviously planning to take it up to the Supreme Court. Which road do you think he takes, and what would be more effective?
Well, Alan Dershowitz is a super genius, and I think why not take both roads? Why not appeal it And also, why not break it up into smaller chunks, smaller bite-sized chunks, and make them more specific? And I think the government attorneys on the federal side might not have been as well prepared as they should have been. But the idea that the court, who is presumably pretty experienced, would say to themselves, look, we are more important than the Constitution, and even though the Constitution clearly says the president has power over this, we're going to say they don't. That's a really serious outrage. Let President Trump get around it any way he can. It's very important that this principle be reinstated.
That's extraordinary. Ben, good to see you. Thanks so much.
God to see you. God bless you.
Ben
Thank
Stein
you.
joining us. Protesters temporarily blocking the Secretary of Education, Betsy DeVos, from entering a public school in Washington, D.C. earlier today. She is in that car. The protesters are stopping her car from moving forward and trying to get in the car. This after Senate Democrats protested her confirmation earlier this week. Is this the start of 4 years of obstruction for President Trump and Republicans? Let's bring in former Special Assistant to President George W. Bush, Scott Jennings, and Catalina Magazine publisher Kathy Aru. Good to see you both. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Hello. So what do you think? I mean, 4 years of this, Scott. I mean, I know that the left is still very upset that they lost the election, and they are losing themselves over it. But obstruction every day?
Every day. It must be exhausting to wake up every day outraged, and I don't ever want to know what that feels like. Look, there's one surefire way to change policy in this country, and that's to win elections. And the Democrats and these liberal protesters just lost an election, and they're venting this rage at these town hall meetings. But you look at places like Utah, where they were protesting against Congressman Chaffetz. Clearly, the people of Utah in that district, they don't want liberal policies. They want Obamacare repeal, so they're out of step with their neighbors. And I just don't see what they're hoping to accomplish. If they really cared that much about these policies, where were they in the November election? They certainly didn't show up for Hillary Clinton.
Kathy, we, of course, value free speech in America. We want free speech.
Right.
But when you get to a point where it's obstruction and it's hostile, isn't that over the line?
Well, it wasn't for the Tea Party. The Tea Party did it. They had no problem calling our president a Kenyan Muslim. They called him Hussein. They didn't call him Barack Obama. They had absolutely no problem. And this group has said that they're called the Indivisible Group. They claim to have 100,000 members. This was Indivisible Utah that created this protest. And they're trying to show that, no, they're not like supposedly their neighbors. This is red Utah. They're not happy with Trump's policies, and they want Chaffetz to respond, to act. They want Chaffetz to know we're not happy. And Chaffetz today did put down Ms. Conway for supporting Ivanka Trump and plugging her. So what they're doing with DeVos and what they're doing is exactly what the Tea Party did, and I don't see anything wrong with that.
Well, you don't see anything wrong with it except the fact that it's stopping business from getting done. And Kathy, that's what the American people voted for in November.
We did not.
They want to see tax reform. They want to see a repeal and replacement of Obamacare. They want to see economic growth. They want to see job opportunities.
It's not happening. We're going to have coal dumped into our rivers. We're going to have Betsy DeVos step into a public school for the first time in her life.
That's ridiculous.
We're seeing Dodd-Frank, because that's what American voters wanted. We wanted the banks to have less regulation. The little man did not want this. We wanted to drain the swamp. He's not draining the swamp.
Actually, I think the little guy did want this, Scott. Because the fact is we haven't seen 3% economic growth at all under President Obama. People want to know why their wages haven't moved in 20 years.
Not only have we not seen economic growth, we've seen absolutely no movement on the policy debates that have been consuming this country for the last 6 years. It's been absolute gridlock. The voters in November spoke clearly. They rejected the policies of incrementalism. They want sweeping change. That's why they unified government control, not just at the federal level, but they also did it in state capitals across this country. They flipped the keys to the Republicans and said, take us somewhere, take us anywhere, because we're sick of the gridlock that we got out of the Obama administration, the Obama years in Washington. So this obstruction, I think, in the future is going to be bad for Democrats, because they're making voters who want change and reject incrementalism very angry.
That's what elections are all about. We'll see if it comes back to haunt them in 2018. Good to see you both. Thank you so much, Kathy and Scott. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up, Kellyanne Conway under fire today for a possible ethics violation. Are critics taking things too far, or did she actually violate the reasons that Donald Trump got elected? Then I took on one of the architects of the Affordable Care Act this morning on the Fox Business Network. With HHS Secretary Tom Price in, is Obamacare on its way out? We'll discuss next.
We had a serious recession in this.
President Trump standing by Kellyanne Conway today after she found herself in the middle of a controversy over the Trump brand. She reportedly apologized to the president for encouraging consumers to buy Ivanka Trump's clothing line after Nordstrom dropped it. Critics are lashing out, so how should the administration handle this? Town Hall News editor Katie Pavlich with us, along with Washington Examiner's Emily Jashinsky and conservative commentator Gina Loudon. Good to see you all, ladies. Thanks so much for joining us. Kick us off here, Gina. What do you think should be done now?
Well, I think that this is not a case of a promotion of Ivanka's brand. This is a case of defending against the violent, radical attacks on the left where they are attacking someone's personal business. There has got to be a stop put to this. This is wrong. They've done it continually, and I, for one, am glad to see an administration that will finally fight back against these personal attacks.
You know, I think Kellyanne, when she said it, Katie, was probably just thinking, look, this is the president's daughter. Sure, go buy it now, not thinking about herself endorsing something as a White House official.
Well, there's two things here. First, I think that the president should be apologizing to Kellyanne because he walked her right into this by tweeting about it, and inevitably she was then asked to comment on it on air and walked herself into this ethics violation potentially. It is a promotion. She had the White House seal behind her. There's a separation between personal business and government business, and because of all the questions surrounding the business ties that we've had in the past in terms of conflicts, this was not a good move, and this is the reason why the U.S. Government Ethics Office is being asked to look into it. That being said, Gina is absolutely right. This boycott on the private side of Ivanka Trump's brand is a leftist mob going after her for all of the wrong reasons, and that side of it can be stopped, but not through the government and not through the White House.
Yeah, I think you make great points, Katie. You're absolutely right. I mean, and it is true that Ivanka Trump didn't do anything to anybody, but they're just putting her in this whole soup of this ideologues that they have. Emily, how do you see it?
Yeah, well, I do think it's important to be clear that this was a promotion. This was a very explicit endorsement of a product as an actor of on behalf of the White House. The statute in question, the federal statute in question, is pretty broad, and this pretty clearly falls under it. But I do think it is important to note that this was not malicious. It's not as though Kellyanne Conway and President Trump are deviously scheming to, drive minor sales increases to Ivanka's line. That's not necessarily a major benefit to anybody. I think you're importing a lot of outsiders, like the voters wanted, into a new situation, and this is growing pains, and I think that's the way that we should see this. Also, boycotts are not going to impact President Trump and Ivanka in a major way. Typically, dwindling sales impact the middle-class people who are working for places like Nordstrom, or dwindling sales for Ivanka Trump's brand, rather.
Well, what do you think happens now? I mean, obviously, the left has pushed this to the ethics department to try to get an investigation going. Do you think that will materialize?
Well, I would say that, this isn't just the left pushing this to an ethics investigation. The Oversight Committee Chairman, Jason Chaffetz, is a Republican, and he asked, along with the minority leader on that committee, for the Ethics Office to investigate. So this is a bipartisan issue, which is separate from the leftist boycott that we've seen. I think the boycotts will continue. I also think it's important to point out that based on Ivanka Trump's own words and actions, she has actually done what she can, and the paperwork is in the process of distancing herself from her brand. And so really this is of no government White House concern, and the White House should not be discussing it.
Yeah, that's a great point, Katie. And you mentioned Donald Trump's tweet. He was tweeting about Nordstrom not being fair to his daughter, but he probably needs to remember he's the president of the free world and should not be tweeting about something like this.
Agreed.
Yeah. But Maria, you don't revoke your father card when you become president. You don't revoke your free speech card when you become a president either. I think those are important points. I think the fact that Ivanka is largely divested from this country, from this brand, I think the fact that Ivanka is largely divested at this point from the brand, I think that this is all about, I think we really have to put a stop to these personal attacks. And I'm glad that the people who love Ivanka are calling out the left for their constant bullying and targeting of individuals. This has been their tactic forever. Republicans have laid down for it forever, and it's nice to see Republicans standing up in the face of this for once.
Sure, but don't do it through the government office, because there are clear ethical boundaries that are in place for Democrats and Republicans, and this doesn't just get a pass.
I agree with you, but here's the thing, that the left never was making these complaints when Chelsea Clinton was profiting very obviously
off of Hillary Clinton.
It's not just the left,
Gina, it's Republicans and Democrats. It's both.
Really important points that you all brought up.
I understand that.
We appreciate it, ladies. Thank you so much. We'll be watching the developments here.
Thanks, Maria.
Meanwhile, the president's point man on the repeal of Obamacare just sworn in. What can we expect now? We're on it after this. All right, breaking news right now. A White House source telling Fox News that the White House will likely not appeal the Ninth Circuit three-judge panel decision to either an en banc session of the Ninth Circuit, nor will it likely file an emergency appeal with the Supreme Court. The plan is to fight it out in U.S. District Court in Seattle on the merits of the executive order. This just coming into the newsroom moments ago from John Roberts. Florida Republican Congressman Ron DeSantis is a longstanding opponent of Obamacare. He joins us right now. But before we get into Obamacare, Congressman, I want to ask you about what we're just learning, that the White House says it's not going to appeal the Ninth Circuit three-judge panel decision. What is an en banc session of the Ninth Circuit? Can you explain this to us?
Right. So it would basically be the whole circuit. So you'd have a huge number of judges sitting. That's a very liberal circuit. The fact that they lost 3-0 with a three-judge panel tells me that the liberal judges will rule against Trump. And then even if you tried to go to the Supreme Court, you have 4 liberal jurists out of 8 that are almost assuredly going to vote against Trump. And I think it's unfortunate because I think the law is pretty clear, and I don't think that district court in Seattle wrestled with the law at all. I thought the three-judge panel at least did some legal analysis. It was just very faulty legal analysis, really, where judges are putting themselves in the shoes of the president and Congress on national security matters, and that is something that's really not going to work out well for our country.
So given the liberal ideologies here, maybe it's not a surprise that the White House says it's not going to actually appeal this because they're hitting brick walls. Do you think that the president then will likely write another executive order, narrow it down, like what Alan Dershowitz is recommending, and Senator Lindsey Graham as well, by the way?
He could do it. Just to clarify, there was the confusion about the green card holders. He could clarify that and say, look, what we're trying to do is prevent entry from 7 terror-ridden countries, and we're also doing a moratorium on the refugee program. Do that clearly. That potentially could do it. Although I would say, Maria, if you look at that argument from that district judge in Seattle, I mean, he was prattling on saying, oh, we've never had terrorism from these 7 countries, which is totally false. I mean, the Ohio State attacker, that was 2 months ago. He was a Somali refugee. So you have a court, I think, in Seattle that's probably inclined against the administration. To me, that's more based in politics than the actual law.
It certainly feels that way. All right, the breaking news there, we got out. And then there's this, Obamacare. Today, I spoke with one of the architects of President Obama's legislation. Listen to this.
The facts are there is no evidence that the Affordable Care Act limited economic growth. As a matter of fact, after
100%
passage of,
wrong.
After
100%
passage
wrong.
of the after
100%
passage
wrong.
of the Affordable
I speak
Care
to
Act,
CEOs
the
and managers of
economy came
businesses
back.
every single day on this program, Dr. Emanuel, and the one thing that they tell me is the reason that they have not hired more people, invested more in their business, is because of the cost of health care. That's the reason.
Let me remind
and when
you
have a legislation that is 18% of the economic growth story, you can be sure that health care is going to have an impact on economic growth.
Maria.
Dr. Zeke Emanuel there, Congressman. I don't know how you can argue that something that's 18% of the economy doesn't impact economic growth. You say what?
Well, that's right. No, you have, look at the individual type of Obamacare mandates. Once you hit 50 employees, I've had a lot of business owners come to me and say, look, I could expand another 10 employees, but it'll put me over that 50 employee mark, and then my health care costs explode because I'm subject to Obamacare mandates. So there's a huge number of economic disincentives, growth disincentives in Obamacare. Incidentally, Tom Price being the secretary under Obamacare has huge discretion on some of these things, so he's going to be able to provide relief administratively, given that the 2,000-page bill had over 1,000 instances where decision-making was delegated to the HHS secretary.
So you make a great point, and that is exactly the point I was trying to make. Real quick, what do you think his number one agenda point will be, Tom Price as HHS secretary now?
I think he's going to go in, find those instances where the Secretary has discretion, and I think he's going to provide relief to patients, to doctors, and to businesses as best he can. That will be a huge help. Not enough in terms of we still need to repeal Obamacare, but that will make a difference, Maria. There's no doubt about it.
All right, Congressman, good to see you today. Thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, we'll see you soon, Congressman DeSantis. Don't forget, the Cost of Freedom kicks off tomorrow, 10 a.m. Eastern. Be sure to catch that. And join me on Sunday morning Futures. I'll be speaking with Senators Lindsey Graham, Rand Paul, as well as former Attorney General John Ashcroft. That is on Sunday Morning Futures on the Fox News Channel. Also, I'll see you Monday morning, bright and early on Mornings with Maria, weekdays on the Fox Business Network from 6 to 9 a.m. Eastern. Hope you'll join me on Monday morning as we await the confirmation of Steven Mnuchin as our nation's next Secretary of the Treasury. Have a great weekend, everybody. The 5 begins now.